Awesome. So we are now recording. So thank you obviously for it's so nice to see you again. We had a great talk, obviously. So this is the second part of the first one, which I think I ended up calling Remembrance, Furnace of Affliction, I think. Um, Nothing we say, we are not official spokespeople of the church. I think we're both deeply passionate, and I think we both construe coming across each other um, as somewhat of a miracle, right? In so many ways that I think people can go back and look at the first episode about. Um, we both love the church. I don't think either of us would be this impassioned, and I am of the belief that passion in the direction of truth is always good. Not everyone agrees with that. I am much more, I think, antagonistic than you are. And I think the reason this series could work so well is because we both love the church. We're coming from completely different perspectives and angles. You have a lifetime of membership that I think comes with an abundance of knowledge that I cannot begin to describe or wrap my mind around. And it is fascinating to me for a million reasons. And so one thing I didn't ask you before we started is whether or not you want to start with an opening prayer. I like the idea of following orthodoxy in that way, but we totally up to you.
I probably wouldn't start it prayer at least
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
um,
Okay, because I think it says the
in a
intention.
live session, but I would definitely start a prayer between me and you before recording, and it like
Okay,
a um, but that's just kind of my feelings behind that. But
sure. Yeah. I guess I'll say that I guess I'll say like
but
Heavenly
if
Father,
you
our
feel
in
com if you feel comfortable, yeah,
oh
let's
yeah, I'm
let's say a
totally
prayer.
yeah.
Go,
Yeah,
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 go
okay,
ahead.
cool. Okay, so our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity provided for us to communicate on a global platform like this, and we pray that your will be communicated in the direction of truth and that it may imbue all of the world in concert to the ends of the church and expansion and love thereof. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Cool. Cool. So it's been an eventful week. I am not going to look at Twitter anymore, so I'm just gonna pretend like it's just us. And I think I feel like I've been construed, and maybe I have been rather antagonistic, or at least read that way, and maybe I have been. And I want to start off by saying that I truly, truly love our prophet. And I'm not just saying that because a talking point or because other people say it. I really, truly do. Um, I think he is a prophet. I definitely think that he communicates, certainly since I've been a member, um, in concert with Christ from everything that I've seen, and from what I can read in the general cosmology of it all. And I really do love him. And I think earlier so I guess we'll get into maybe some of the polygamy talks. I think what do you think about it? Or maybe how you just read the entire thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was saying like I think the idea that we don't sustain the prophets if we don't follow the orthodoxy of the church immediately, I think is unfounded because we know that the church requires unilateral consent, and I like that it requires unilateral consent. Because one, I think it makes more way for discussions to develop in the general membership. And I think in a properly situated, um, I think in a properly situated environment where people can actually pray with the Holy Ghost and discern and reflect, I think it creates a lot of ground for people to come to a lot of independent conclusions that can then feed the collective leadership, right? Because they are, after all, presiding over us. So they are, I think, a little bit of chicken or the egg, whether they're responsive or attentive to where we're at. But in neither accounts, I think it is conducive. And I think that unilateral consent provides a mechanism for us to discuss these things, um, so that they come to a clear decision once that is made, right? But I think from an inverted perspective, it can create
Mhm.
a little bit of a trauma bond, where nobody
Oh
can
yeah.
think, and then
Yeah.
everyone's just waiting for to be fed the next line. So that's kind of where I'm at um, with that. But I guess some of the things that I lit up people about is so starting with the I think safe to discuss topic of condemnation, and I say that I think it's safe to discuss because one, I think it's intellectually honest to have the discussion, whether or not we are in that state, because it's something that a lot of people are talking about. I think it's relatively safe to talk about it if our prophet himself has mentioned it at any point in the past, let alone the recent past. And then also we saw, I think, Unshaken, who we know and love, also discuss it today. So I think it's a safe discussion to at least entertain. And one of the things that I realized, or maybe you can call it prompting, revelation, what have you, amidst all of this, in relation to Melchizedek, which we know to be the spiritual body. I come from a more esoteric background. You come from the Orthodox and more traditional background, which I think should take precedence, certainly in the institution of the church, which is why I think this dynamic makes sense. But I think in spiritual esoterica, spirit tends to be associated with the feminine, with the water, and I think, and we can get into this too, but I think when we read the blessing of the bread and the water, you can even see that there, where the bread takes upon ourselves the name of Christ in a temporal way, and then in the water, the spirit of Christ, right? So, all this to say, I think with that preface, we also understand then that Melchizedek is a spiritual in nature. Um, and And this then brings me to the inception of the Order of Melchizedek, which I think is DNC 84-6, where the keys are first derived from the wife of Moses' father, which I think becomes relevant in the situationship, so to speak, of him being of the wife. And I think that means something. And I think it even means something in the proximity of spirit and also the idea of a heavenly mother, only because the way I saw it is that the keys derive, that there's a legal phrase that is pleads to the jurisdiction. And I construe a lot of law to be in emanation or in parity of natural law. But
Hmm.
it reminds me of the idea of plead to the jurisdiction from Moses to the father of the wife. And I think in this weird triage, that's where the keys of Melchizedek then begin to derive. So that is to say that the keys of Melchizedek derive from the wife and not the concubine of Moses. And if 132 is to have any subject matter at all, I think this part is relevant because this is where the keys kind of begin. And so if this is in fact relevant, and maybe it's not, but if it is, then I think superimposing 132, if it's untrue that it came from Joseph Smith, I could see how that would be the inception of a quote unquote um condemnation insofar that spirit is associated with feminine. If you superimpose a blasphemy or something divergent to that, I could see that causing spiritual blindness that would in turn moot the order of Melchizedek or the keys to Melchizedek, as we can construe from the 1832, I believe, like a first allegation of condemnation. But that's where I'm at. That's been my day. That's been my week. That's also my call or my prayer for repentance on breaching anything beyond reasonable discourse amidst all this and trying to get to the truth. So that's how are you? Where are you at with all this? And sorry for the long intro.
Well, just from my end, it goes back to Doctrine and Covenants, another part of 84, where it just mentions that in 54 through 58, where which vanity or it says in 54, and your minds in times past have been darkened because of unbelief and because you've treated lightly the things you have received. So that could be the Book of Mormon in particular. That could also be the the Bible as well. Which vanity and belief have brought the whole church under condemnation, and this condemnation resteth upon the children of Zion. and they shall remain under condemnation till they repent and remember the new covenant. Even in the Book of Mormon and the former commandments which I have given them, not only to say but to do according to that which I have written, that they may eventually bring forth fruit meet for their father's kingdom. Otherwise, there remaineth a scourge and a judgment to be poured upon the children of Zion. So during that time in Doctrine in 1832, that's when that was written. Um, D&C 84. That's around that same time that polygamy, from my understanding, started. And there was very clear indications within the Book of Jacob and the Book of Mormon that polygamy is not a god.
Yeah,
And
no, I definitely agree.
and so as we look at 132, I mean there we could say it was written by anybody, right?
Right.
And and I think it's up to each individual personally to discover that for themselves rather than taking my word for your word for it, right? But there's there's text lines even within the text that stray differently from the other remaining sections of Doctrine and Covenants in the way it's even written, right?
Right, right. That's I am much more so I always tell people like punish me and not you. I don't always say well, but I'm telling people now, punish me and not you for anything you say.
Hmm.
Um no, I definitely agree, right? I'm not well, I already have told people what my position on 132 is,
Hmm.
um but yeah, I mean let each person discern for themselves. One thing that I think is interesting from specifically the passage you just wrote is I remember coming in to before getting baptized. Um, and I was telling, the missioners, and I mean, it was maybe the best time of my life, to be completely honest. And I was telling the missioners, like, yeah, I remember all this. I know all the, like, so even as I was reading, I was like, yep, 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 yep. Um, and so then when I first started attending Sunday school, it was my favorite thing in the world, right? Sunday school, Elder Quorum, it was amazing. And everyone was very receptive, I think my objectively much more esoteric understanding
Or
or reading of,
naive understanding, or
well, everything I was saying was literally as read in the Book of Mormon, but it was coming from a complete. So, for example, one of the easiest example I can think of is Sarah Hemla, meaning the radiant compassion, right? Which radiant compassion can be construed as a Christ. It's a Christ a compassion that is radiant, that fills you with light and that heals your blind spots is in it of itself could be construed as a depiction of Christ,
yeah.
right? And so when I was reading that, all of, I forget where at this point it is, but basically there was a lead opponent against Sarah Hemla that was defeated. And then all of the army or the leadership or what have you was running after trying to get into they were quote unquote going towards the heart of Sarah Hemla.
Hmm.
And so when I was reading that, when we were talking about that in Sunday school, I was like, yeah, no, that's obvious because what's happening here is that when you first get baptized, your the lead Satan, right, the lead opponent in your life, the opposing force, no longer has power over you, akin to the way in which he was defeated in this series of texts. But then the demons or the armies will always aim from the angle of your blind spots towards
Yeah.
your heart.
Your weakness. Yeah.
Right. And then
Yeah.
with the closing of Helaman of Helaman and then Judgment in the Heart or something like that, I immediately related to the Egyptian mystery of light as a feather, or your heart has to be as light as a feather to come through, right? And we know the Book of Mormon is Arabic inspired or right, or Middle Eastern inspired and then Hebrew
Yeah.
inspired, right? So it stands to
Yeah.
reason it would have, you know,
Those meanings. Yeah.
right. That
Yeah.
those would be element, right? And then when it said Helaman of Helaman, in relation to this judgment and the heart and I was like, yeah, no, that's obviously Helaman of Helaman. That's obviously reaffirming the Christ nature of Sarah Hemla, Helaman of Helaman being God in Christ, like the Christ of Christ, God of
Mhm.
Christ, then kind of tying together the entire bow of the story. And to me, I was like, yeah, this is a super obvious story. And they were like, what? They were like, that we have never. what are you saying, sir? This, but not really, right? Like that was the split second reaction, but then afterwards we're like, oh yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. So I think with you even saying, are we reading the Book of Mormon and we're not reading it, or we have forgotten the Book of Mormon, or what? I think not trying to be arrogant or place myself as the solution to that, but I think my dichotomy between, the way it's always been read and this radically different, quote unquote, radically different way of reading it, um, may become more relevant in the conversation of what are we reading and what do the words, because again, in Sarah Hemla, both parties are saying it's literal. I'm saying it's literally the conjunction of the words radiant compassion, and they're saying no, it's literally the state of Sarah Hemla. Right. So we're both, the Book of Mormon is literal. We're both on
Yeah,
that
you can
train.
both be right, and you can both be correct. And I guess, and for those people that have their doubts about the Book of Mormon because they've read so much anti-doctrine out there, if you do have doubts about it, I mean, go back to the Hebrew symbolism within the Book of Mormon. There's no way that someone like Joseph Smith could have known such a thing. Um, Several years ago, I had a Sunday school teacher that was born in Jordan, and then he converted to the church, and then I mean, he's fluent in multiple languages, but I mean, if you go back to like even the language, like for example, layman. So anything that mentions that like LAM, it just means they're a mean person in Hebrew, like, in Hebrew or Arabic or the language of back then. Um, like for example, like anti is actually it actually in Arabic it means the people of. So we talk about like the anti-Nephi Lehites, like you're talking about the people of Nephi Lehi. And and so there's so much of like even within the language of the text that testify that we have a treasure within the church. And it's meant to be read, it's meant to be used. And the condemnation of where we are at as a church right now is because we don't we don't find the further light and knowledge within the book that's there.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. Something that so Lemuel and Lemuel has actually came up a lot this week because Connor Boyack just did a musing on this, and I think it's super fascinating perspective. One of the first things that I thought, and this will actually get even more convoluted, but one of the first things that I thought when I heard or when I read the story of Lemuel and Lemuel is the Lucifer mystery, or rather the nature of Lucifer.
Hmm.
So which was my first inclination, but this was coming from at a place where I think I was more orthodoxy oriented in
Hmm.
the institution than I am at in this second. Um, then after seeing his video, it's interesting. So basically, if I understand the video correctly, Connor Boy essentially construes Laman and Lemuel to be trying to preserve maybe the more Christ like mysteries, or maybe like the tree of life and that kind of a thing, um and rejecting what would have been the rising Deuteronomist narrative. And I think now it's a trending topic in our community around it, um but basically went around about it the wrong way, right? The methodology was wrong. So maybe, so even in and of itself it could be an incorrect way of going about it, even if the intentions were truer than what was rising. And then in this kind of purview, then this would make the church members maybe more susceptible to being a layman and a Lemuel from the standpoint of rejecting the prophet or the rising prophets or the restorationists or from the prequel. And this prequel even goes back to this whole conversation about um the keys of Melchizedek. But the this even so, but then it also reminded me of the way many people. around this same conversation of Layman, Lemuel, Lucifer, and who is what and which is which, um, allege that Lucifer and Jesus are conflated in the Bible. Um, I don't, I'm not saying that this is true, but it did remind me of that, the morning star, and there's like different references, or some people are saying like cast it down to earth and trying to, and this again goes back to the idea of whether the God of the Old Testament, who Jesus, and some people have said, the God of the Old Testament, whenever in Jesus in John 8:44 says, if your father was my father, you would recognize me, but your father is the devil, the father of lies, murdered from the beginning.
Mhm.
They'll say, well, he's talking about the Pharisaic nature specifically. Okay, but if he was talking about that specifically, why did we jump to murder? Like, you know what I mean? Like Pharisees and murder are, I don't know, I would put them in the same category. Um, and I think even that is too much or too strong of an allegation for just counting footsteps and then gnats and camels. You know what I mean? Like I think
Yeah.
your father's a devil is a little bit deeper than that. And yeah, the nature of Layman and Lemuel. Yeah, what is your growing up in the church, what is your feeling about them? Because as I understand, the church has always said that is not following, the Deuteronomist kind of orthodoxy of that establishment. I don't know, what's your read of it?
I don't know exactly. Can you kind of explain further what you mean by that?
Okay, like when so and maybe not even Yuri, but like when you hear Layman and Lemuel in a church context, right? If you hear it in your classic Sunday school, what is usually um the context in which it comes up?
Well, I think when I think of them, I think that their number one has to be oppositional things, and any even within like even look at like Lehi's family, like within any given family, there might be some that of your kids that stay on the covenant path, and there might be others that will not. Um, and but when thinking of like Lim and Lemuel as individuals, like yeah, they did not want to give up what riches they had. And we very much could be in that same situation when we're asked to go to the New Jerusalem or when we're asked to give up the securities of life to follow Christ, right?
Yeah.
And and so from that context, I mean, and even looking at Lemmy and Lemmy, like they had a hard time believing their father. And what's interesting about Lehi is that he was not a prophet. He was not the spokesperson of the prophet during that time. It was Jeremiah. But that still tells me that we as individuals can still receive revelation, and we need to receive revelation for our families. And that revelation can also be received for others.
You bring up a really good point. You bring up a lot of really good points. Yes, I definitely, I definitely feel that people should receive revelation. I feel like everyone is entitled as a child of God to receive revelation. Um, you remind me. So, okay, so part of the reason why this whole conversation even matters to me at all isn't because I necessarily care about Joseph Smith being a polygamist or not a polygamist. What I do care about is people being properly oriented as to the nature and the scope of God in relation to us, because depending on what we believe to be true would determine the extent and the capacity by which we would allow ourselves to grow and expand and evolve. And
Yeah, how we
so,
behave, right?
right. And
Yeah.
so when you say, we should be getting revelation for our family. It reminds me of it took about a year, maybe longer, for me to get baptized, specifically because at first I was told, well, the prophet receives revelation for the world, right? And so he has unilateral jurisdiction of prophecy for the world. And I was like, and that we do for our families, right? Or immediate jurisdiction. And then I was like, well, I love that for you guys, but the problem is I already receive, or I at least feel, and I think the world, I feel like a good amount of people feel, that I receive revelation beyond my immediate jurisdiction. And my concern is that if I knowing, able, and willingly sign into or a part of something that requires me to believe, or within my belief structure, that I am to receive only
Yeah,
revelation from my jurisdiction. I
yeah,
feel as though by ritual, I will be delegating my revelation to the prophet, and I'm not willing to delegate or defer my revelation to the prophet. And so, on those grounds, even though I believe exactly everything you're saying at this point, I couldn't just on that alone. A year later, I came across missionaries around my birthday, or I think it was on my birthday. No, it was,
that's
I think
that's
it had
cool.
to be right before. Yeah. But because the Christmas devotional was on my, oh, maybe it was because maybe anyway, the Christmas devotional was that, and the one that started with remembrance. And so at that point, it was, I brought up to the missionaries. They're like, "Oh, you remember?" It's like, "No, but I love you guys. At this point, I'm not a member." And so they kind of looked at each other. It's like, can we double check on that?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So long story short, they circled back and they said, yeah, so the prophet really is the only one authorized to receive revelation as to the direction of the church for the whole world." Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense, of course. And I wouldn't want to, because why would I want? No.
Yeah.
Even if I could, I wouldn't want to.
Can you
Nor
say
does it
that
make
phrase
sense.
again? So the prof, can you say that phrase again exactly like
So
you
the
just said?
second time around, the clarification was that the prophet receives revelation for the direction of the church globally, right? It's very different to receive revelation for the direction of the church globally than it is to receive revelation for the
Revelation for the whole
world.
world. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, yeah, I have no objection to him receiving, the only one receiving revelation to the direction of the church. So that works for me, as long as and my asterisk was, as long as I am letting you guys know, you guys are okay with it, that I am unwilling to defer any of the revelation that I have received and that will continue to receive than I would have otherwise received outside of this context. Then absolutely, I would love to get baptized. And so then I obviously proceeded to get baptized. The reason I bring that up is because if one, I guess maybe absolute clarity on which of the two it is, but then either way, ritualistically, one or both are implicated. One, and then two, um, if people believe correctly or incorrectly that they can only receive revelation for their immediate family, that's going to cause enormous limitations to the scope
Limitations.
and
Yeah.
scale by which you're
Yeah.
able, or you will even try to perceive revelation beyond the context that you believe you are limited to, whether that be by ideology, by ritual, by restriction, or by personal restriction. So that's, I
So
think, something that's important to,
yeah, and thanks for kind of clarifying that because I mean Lehi was a visionary man, right?
yeah.
And so he did have that basically the gift of prophecy through vision. And so yeah, I stand corrected where, he became then the prophet of his whole, the multitudes of families that followed them. And and but that's always been a pretty big hurdle for a lot of church members is, oh, people outside of our church can receive revelation.
Yeah.
Um, but but then if you think about, I mean, can you think of a story in the Book of Mormon where that happens?
Well, I, I almost have to reread it just for that, but I can tell you that Doctrine and Covenants absolutely says that the mysteries of God are to be revealed to us through the order of Melchizedek. So I cannot imagine how the mysteries of God would be revealed to us while also only remaining jurisdictional um, in relation to our family.
Well,
So,
and that's what's so interesting is the reason why. So you have the story of Samuel the Lamanite, and Samuel the Lamanite was not the prophet during that time. the Nephites were actually during that period. Do you know much of the story of Samuel Lamanite at all? Do you remember that one?
So I read the story of Samuel Eliminate as the transcended satanic impulse or the transcended violence impulse, and I read it as it's easier to come to Christ from that purview than from the like Luciferic, prideful, logical justification purview. So I read the story of Samuel the Lamanite as as the upward moving prong in the kind of Council in Heaven, Back to the Future arc, and then the Ascending arc in a Law of One kind of perspective, which we don't have to
I've
cover at this
never
moment, but that's how I read the story.
I've never read it that I've never even heard it like that before. And there's that's not wrong at all, right? But at least from the core of the ideas of revelation and prophecy and a prophet and traditions in that sense. Samuel Ammonite came from a distant, far off land. And one of the reasons why the Nephites were actually the ones that were throwing arrows at him.
Right.
The people of the church,
They still are.
they still are. And they're throwing arrows at him because he is telling them to repent. And he is telling them, hey, in the next couple of days, next couple of years, there's going to be a star that's going to appear, and that's going to be heaven, that's going to be the Son of God that's coming. They're like, who are you to reveal that to us? Like they had a prophet, quote unquote, during that time, but that prophet wasn't teaching them that, or else they would have maybe embraced Samuel Lamanite just a little bit more.
And the whole story replays,
What
right?
clarify? What do you mean by that?
Well, it's the same story playing. Well, okay. I guess it depends on how you read this, right? And again, I love Prophet Russell Nelson. I truly, but I think the story plays, and I think this goes back to even the nation of the condemnation was not because of the even prophets of the church. It was because the members
The
were taking the
members.
Book of Mormon, right? So put
Hmm.
that asterisk there before everyone attacks me and accuses me of not sustaining the prophet.
Yeah.
But I think the story that's recapitulating is um that the orthodoxy runs contra, as you described it, the vision, like he was a visionary man, right? And,
Hmm.
and it also prompts the question again of how do we define profit? Do we define it by statute or do we define it by works and fruits,
Ones and within the church and within the construct of what you consider the church, the prophet is someone that has keys, right? But I think by your fruits you'll know them. And I think that there's been prophets of the latter, of the Church of Jesus Christ, the Christ of Latter-day Saints they're very visionary, that do practice their keys righteously. Um, that they practice, that they use their keys um for prophecy. But then I believe that there's others that are probably just sitting in the chair and they might quote unquote hold the keys, but they don't utilize them. Um, to give you an example, the same could be said about deacon's quorum president or teacher's quorum president. You have a 12 to 16-year-old boy that might be conferred the keys to that office, but that doesn't mean that they're utilizing them. They might they might be trying to do the best that they can to fulfill their calling, but that does not mean that they're utilizing the keys of that kingdom in the way that Christ would. Does that
Right.
make sense?
No, I agree with you. I mean, that's kind of I mean, that's kind of my allegation, right? That
Hmm.
I think it's at 84:45. It says, the keys of Melchizedek is so that as you wear even the spirit of Christ himself, right? So I would say that anything beneath that would be a dereliction of the quote unquote keys or the authority. I think another thing is that the keys have been construed based on a Catholic ideology, from
Yeah.
what I understand, which is the Peter, James, Paul, what have you. Part of the debunking, if you can call it that, or part of the kind of thing that took off as a concept after my debate about Joseph Smith is that the rock by which you shall build this house upon seems to relate back to Revelation, or is not showed to you by flesh and bone, but rather my Father who is in heaven. And Joseph would have been the one to restore that because, as you say, everyone had been saying that it was this kind of, it's almost like you're stepping into enemy territory and then building your castle on a quote unquote, not really enemy, but you're building a castle on opposing ideology, which already is dubious, right? You're accepting someone else's narrative of a prequel to then
Hmm.
assert your own. And so that seems much more respondent than first movement. And it just never resonated with me. I'm like, Christ didn't establish like that wasn't why he was here. Um, but yeah, I mean, again, I think if I understand even kind of, I said Rob Warwick, is that his name?
Yeah, Rob Warren.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 If I understand kind of what the picture he's painting, right? And I understand that because there's so much already seeing history, like so much that it
Yeah.
can be overwhelming. You have to kind of focus
Yeah.
on the points that make the arc.
Hmm.
Um, I think the um the overarching narrative in that way um seems to be that the law the lost the condemnation, so to speak, was specifically about the keys of Melchizedek. I think that's the allegation, and that the keys would be restored. And so I was on the train that the keys were on a fast track of being restored up until the moment in which the church dropped a reaffirmation of the polygamy narrative. But up until that point, I hadn't even noticed, maybe for the first time, maybe this was always the case, but it was the first time that I noticed it, that the church was titled the Church of Jesus Christ, which would have been the final iteration before the millennium, or the final iteration into the fullness of time. So that was the first time that I noticed that. And so I went on this kind of like exuberant or like excited spree about that. And then because it was even worded very strangely when it first came out, because the verbiage that I first saw was polygamy denial. And I was like, yes. And then I had to even read the text like 3 or 4 times to make sense of what it was saying, because it was written in such a way where I was left a couple of like, wait, so which one are they saying? And then I scrolled down because I was like, no, they said polygamy. What? And then other Joseph Smith monogamous proponents were like, no, 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 it's reaffirming that Joseph Smith was a and I'm really good at like scrolling down. Um, but I was trying to figure out like why are people saying that the church is doubling down on polygamy? And then I went back and then I reread it, and then I was like, oh, it is pointing back to Joseph Smith being a polygamist. And that's when I became furious, because at that point, and I could be completely wrong about this, but at that point, I read it like the church had clear awareness that maybe he was not likely to have been a polygamist, because this back-to-back DNC 132 bombshells just dropped.
Hmm.
So I read that to be like, you have billions of dollars. Surely someone watched this before you drop this statement. So then I'm reading this like you are knowingly at this point reaffirming something maliciously. And then I have to question, well, what is the true intention of you reaffirming something you may know that it isn't true, which makes me question the daisy chain from 132 to 89 to family proclamation to what I hopefully erroneously construe as subjugation. Um, in a very clear and distinct way and no longer revelation. Now, hopefully, I'm way off the mark here, and I very well maybe, but that was my first like, like, response. That's where I was coming from because at that point, I felt like the entire orientation of what any of this means. Um, and then my second thought was, where's Prophet Russell M. Nelson, right?
Yeah.
Can someone check on him? Because are we in Deathly Hollows now? Which is probably not an appropriate thing to say, but that was my second thought, right? I was like, oh shoot, like where is he? Where is he? Like I want to, but but then I thought about it, like maybe it's just administer. Maybe someone's like, can you order the bagels and reaffirm to people asking that
The
Joseph
cream
came from
the
Joseph.
cream cheese is good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like then I was like, maybe it's not that deep, and maybe that's something to pray about or wherever anybody in this situation may be. But that's
I mean,
yeah,
if you're the church, as you're trying to lead millions of people, you're not gonna want to tell the whole world that it's under condemnation.
right.
There is a lot of good that comes from the church, and that is why I'm still involved,
No,
right?
and I'm still involved too.
And but one like I personally feel like those that search will find, those that care will find, right? And with that further and like with that further knowledge, it's relieving for me to be honest. Like it's relieving for me to look back at church history and to view it the way that I do now and saying, oh, rather than this narrative that was taught for my whole life that the church was perfect, it's the people that aren't. That's not true. The church is not the fullness of the gospel. The
Yeah,
fullness of the gospel has aspects of it within the church. Does that make sense?
yeah. So okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, so this is actually maybe a part where I do have a little bit of a hard time, only because it's already been alleged to be under condemnation by leadership, right? So
Mhm.
that's the part where I'm like, well, we already said it, so why are we having like that? That's the part that does honestly confuse me because I'm like, well, if we know it to be true, shouldn't it be relieving that we're coming closer as to understanding why? Um, and I understand when people say like it does have 17 million members that it has to kind of think about.
Yeah,
I think, but when I think about people saying that, my first thought is, well, that means that we have 6.8 billion members who aren't. So then
yeah,
are we sacrificing
yeah.
the totality of membership for the preservation of the emotional safety or the
Yeah,
idea of
yeah.
the emotional safety of the existing memberships?
I don't like the sound of that. I don't like
Right,
the
right.
sound of
Well,
that.
yeah, and you can
Yeah,
see how a new person will be like, "Wait, this is a bad trade, guys. This is a bad trade deal. This is bad. This is
yeah,
this is a bad trade deal." In the same respect, um, I because I'm also thinking, okay, like who would be affected by this, right? The people that I think would be affected would be Utah proper, because if you are on the receivership, and again, this is speculation, right? I'm not alleging this happened, but if
hmm
speculatively, if someone felt as though they had to behave in a certain way as a derivative of this narrative, right? We saw the case. I mean, part of my concern, and I think maybe part of the reason why this thing kind of became wildfire is because right after all of this went down in a 24-hour window, all these cases were resurrected. And also the guy, the dentist that killed his wife and asked, I think, his kids to assist. Also, and he was cheating with 6 women, also went viral like within the same day. And
I didn't even hear about that. Oh, wow.
yeah, so I think if something broke, uh, I think a lot of people read that as a clear indication of something going astray.
Hmm.
Especially the way they happen in like this really narrow window. Um, but I guess I'm thinking, okay, like who would be affected? I think the people that were maybe in more compliant relationships,
Hmm.
maybe that they would not have been in if they did not feel that this key points from 132 to 89 to the family proclamation were present. And that's who I imagine would be the most like the first people who my heart would go out to. But also, I think we have a lot of room to make remedy. I mean, I think we repentance believing people, and I also think we have more than enough good faith resources to make up for that. That's why I was still having a hard time rationalizing the idea that if if they believe that it was not the case,
Hmm.
um, I didn't think it would make sense. I think it in my view, made so much more sense to come out about the truth because I think it would unleash a fury.
I would love for them to do so. I would love for that to happen. I would, not just because I would be vindicated, not just because I would be vindicated for, for the people, amount of people I've tried to tell that, hey, like Joseph Smith was not who we thought he was in this context of being a polygamist. Um, I would love for I would love for that truth to come out, and it will one day. It will.
Well, I think it's out. I think the church is resisting it. But let's pretend that it's not, right? Let's just go to it's not. Um, you bring up, I think, something really important that also confused me in all of this, right? Because if you assert that this started with Joseph Smith, um, then you're asking people to believe in a prophet who was a liar and overt um abuse. I mean, whatever you want to say, right? Not great, not great in very bad ways. Um, and I think in a lot of ways, if someone grew up believing that their prophet can be flawed in this specific way, that would make way for tolerance of a lot of things that they would perhaps not otherwise tolerate, right?
Hmm.
Oh, my husband cheated, but our prophet Joseph Smith, you know what I mean? Like it makes way for a
Yeah,
lot of really bad things.
yeah.
Um, and at the same time, we've already debunked a lot of things that Brigham Young did. We've debunked the priesthood ban. I actually do subscribe to Adam God theory in relation to derivative from a law of one derivative standpoint, not from
Hmm.
Adam as God standpoint.
Hmm.
So I actually do believe that the Brigham Young is nonetheless a prophet, even if he erred. But from the standpoint of error, we've already attributed quite egregious errors to Brigham Young. So I don't understand any idea that we are like, could we muddy him any more than the priesthood ban, right? That's why,
Yeah.
like, it's still to me so confusing as it again,
But how
if they
many,
know.
but again, how many members know about that priesthood ban and that that was entirely based on Brigham's own narrative, right? Like,
I thought everyone.
n-
No. See, this is the part, see,
see,
that's the thing that
and
confuses me.
that's what's just kind of what baffles me is like it's almost and like without it's kind of like there's all this dirty laundry in the backyard that no one talks about, right? And as members, like if you do your research, it can be found. I mean, I was just talking to someone, one of my very good childhood high school friends. We played football on the same football team for 7, 8 years. I saw him in the museum with my kids just randomly. And we're talking about a lot of this type of stuff because his wife actually started a Instagram group on counseling people that are leaving the church and being an advocate for them, being a therapist for them, right?
Is there a lot of people that are leaving the church?
Yeah, yeah.
Has there been
And
an uptick recently? Do you know?
within my friend groups, oh yeah, oh
I,
yeah.
it's
Within friend groups, within, and I can only speak for around the Salt Lake area. I mean, yeah, I mean it's the numbers are, yeah, it's happening, right? And what I was trying, what the reason why I brought that up is just because even he mentioned to me, like he never even heard that Joseph Smith was a polygamist until probably his mission, right?
so something that
Quote
confuses.
unquote a polygamist, quote
Right, right,
unquote.
right,
Like,
right, right.
yeah,
The narrative. He
yeah,
had never heard this narrative.
yeah,
Something that really confuses me a lot, right? And I think this does relate to condemnation or any subject thereof, is the way we can spend 3, 4, 5 hours, 10 hours a week in church and not know like the most basic fundamentals. Because in my mind, I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what's I cannot even imagine like, and this blew, and I felt bad. No, I didn't. I'm lying. I didn't feel bad. Not in that moment, and I don't know that I do right now. But I did when this came out from the church, I posted in my YSA Discord group. I was like, why is the church affirming that Joseph Smith was a polygamist when under the sealing narrative, when we know that he was sealed to Brigham Young as well under the law of adoption, and sealings were dramatically different.
hmm
Um, the sealings were like what I construed to be star families in the New Age community, which is like we're the same soul stream. We came from the same spark, and so you're doing this. This could be a form of when we're the same life wave, right? We're the same resonance. It can be construed as being. In fact, I even thought of you whenever I made a video about this on my Twitter a few days after, where I was talking about, when people just click together and they can almost start like business or dynasties to the effect of building. So, for example, I was almost a shareholder of a water filtration company for like whole home water filtration systems because it's something that I believe in, right? And so, in theory, something like a star family or like these group ceilings would kind of be more like dynastic to the ends of building Zion than anything in the universe of marriage, anything at
yeah,
all,
yeah.
is how I read it, right? And so, people immediately respond, like, really? You can't say that. Some people can't handle this conversation. I'm like, our whole everything we do is it comes from two streams, either the Joseph Smith stream or the 13289 Family Proclamation stream. What do you mean?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
what are we
yeah,
doing? Right?
yeah.
Because I would rather be at the beach if we're not going to be talking about theology. Like I don't
hmm
understand. Like that's the part where I'm like, what? I genuinely don't understand how that happens. Because what is everyone doing there so many hours a week and not know the basic building blocks of our
And
faith?
I've found to realize that I don't know. It's just like some people don't care. Like I brought up a lot of my viewpoints, even to my own bishop, right, and to other people out there, and they're like, "Oh, interesting. All right, see you later."
Well, that's fine, but that's the thing, right? I feel the people who don't care, they don't care. So why not just tell the truth?
Yeah, you would think that, right?
Like if they don't care,
You
then
would,
they're not going to care in either direction. So just tell
yeah,
the truth, in my
you
view.
would you would think that, and I think that that would. I mean, it would. It's under is for example in my opinion another reason why we're under condemnation, right? I mean, we can't even live to the truths that we're taught. Um, and we also can't really look back on history at the facts there's still an argument for it. There's still a legitimate argument enough for it that people are told within our culture, within the ladder, within our fortress that don't hear anything that's anti-Mormon. And in this context, this could be considered what is anti-Mormon literature, right?
Well, okay, yeah. So that's a little bizarre to me. Only because I think in a classical theosophy or in classical America, you understand that the truth, you just let it out and it can defend itself. Right. So the idea that anybody that claims truth would say, don't talk to someone who proclaims lies is a little, I don't know. I don't even I see this is the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't even know where to come from or where to go with
Oh
it.
yeah. Yeah.
No, you're totally right. I mean, I've heard that, right? I remember once I remember, I remember when people found out that I was doing this debate. We were like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, what, bro? Like, I thought you had faith and I thought you believed in the Holy Ghost. So if I know nothing, if nothing else, shouldn't that step in if we are moving in the direction of truth? Like, I don't, and this is where
Mhm.
like my kind of circuitry breaks with the quote unquote culture of church members because I can't cut it in any kind of way that it makes sense from the narratives that they're pitching, right? Because it's like,
It's because so many of them are and I love all members of the church.
oh,
I
me
hold
too.
various callings in the church, but so many of them are just sheep, right? And they're sheep in the context of they're only fed with someone picking up that spoon, putting in the bowl, putting it back up in their mouth, just one by one. That's how they're fed, right? And and they don't look to, yeah, I mean, there's a lack of curiosity. In my opinion, there's a lack of curiosity, but even a lack of understanding what it means to go to the temple when we're covenanting to strive to be able to converse with the Lord and to gain further light and knowledge. And some of what we're talking about today is that further light and knowledge, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, and and there's yeah, sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, no, no. No, I'm just listening to you.
And I do take a while to like obviously
No, no, no. And I
process my
know I'm like,
thoughts,
I'm
and
a
I
lot.
I
Like I
pause, but
feel,
I also pause a lot. So for those that are listening, I pause a lot because I really try to obviously compose my thoughts effectively through how I say it, right? Um, but but yeah, I mean I mean the what I have found, I mean, this is like a 6 or 7 year long journey for me of coming to, find what I've found as that further light and knowledge. And it's still something I'm trying to construct. What do we do from here, right?
well, I guess two things, right? Three, you're an amazing Latter-day Saint for composing your thought. I should be more like you. I'm sure the world wishes I was a lot more like you in that way. Um, and it is better to be like you than completely unhinged, so to speak. The which brings me to like this also started for me 7 years ago. That's when my Joseph Smith experience happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're going into that chapter this week, which also is fascinating to me. Um, but it's true. It feels the reason I feel like I'm at an impasse here is because I don't actually care about Joseph Smith's polygamy, like I told you earlier, but I do
Yeah.
care that people are properly oriented as to the nature of God, um, and the and to be properly oriented as to the nature of God and how God communicates and how to be able to read it, which is, the whole reason why I became a member and why I'm here, um, is so that people can do that. And my
And
issue with
I'm glad you went back to that because there's something I want to add with that idea, but you keep going first.
okay, yeah, so my issue with 132 isn't even the polygamy, is the idea of divine command. And I cannot work in an environment where people believe that God can arbitrarily command something like that. Um, and that's the nature of God. Because
Hmm.
if you adopt that ideology, I quite literally cannot work with you in any meaningful way as to developing your spiritual capacity, not in any way that I can construe anyway or that I can see. And I also reject divine command theory as fundamentally satanic, right? Because divine command would construe one to be developing to be like a minion and not, you know,
Self-thought. Yeah.
right. Not exaltation for sure. And then the third thing is it will send people in an erroneous path as to how revelation works, in my opinion, because revelation, in my opinion, and in my experience, comes with an entire like codex, an entire key of codex, an entire chain of theosis or theology, right? Is not just God said to be a polygamist, and so we're gonna do that now. It's like for me with DNC 89, it came with an entire stream as to celibacy is our life force, or rather, for men like semen retention, and for women, celibacy is our life force. And so it begins to develop its own capacity that moves upward, that then becomes the light and knowledge that works directly with our spiritual eye. And so if we're not going to use it for the exclusive ends or the exclusive intent of procreation, it is a misuse of that energy, but it is not a punitive misuse of that energy. It's simply an ineffective one that does not lead to your spiritual exaltation. So it's less slap on the wrist and it's more a misuse of your potential. But it cannot work by commandment, because the moment you make it by commandment, then you strip the spiritual essence of it, because now you're doing it from the inside, from the outside in, instead of doing it from the inside out, which again inverts the entire thing. So even when I said don't drink, don't smoke, because you want to have the cleanest baseline to be able to read and receive the Holy Ghost and be celibate, unless you're trying to have a child, um, and hopefully married, because that's a big commitment to not attach to any paper. Um, it's a misuse of your life force. And so there's an entire chain of theory and theosis, I guess, that came with the word of wisdom revelation that I independently had for remembrance. So whenever I recognized it, I recognized it when the mission is presented, I was like, oh, I saw the same thing and blah, blah, blah. But and I remember, and even reading 89, because I read 89 first, before the you have to commit to the word of wisdom to get baptized, um, which then is putting barriers on God, whatever. Um, but I considered it to be close enough to the truth, and so I considered it a minor error. But then when you add willful malice, it changes the whole thing. But that's the reason why I feel like I'm at an impasse. And we can wrap it up, so I know it's late for you. Um, but that's why I feel like I'm at an impasse with this specifically, not because of polygamy on its
Yeah.
face, but because it becomes unworkable with the model that I know of
And
how the
you've
world works.
and it's amazing. This is gonna be really interesting as we continue to do these because you look at things at a much deeper level than I do, right? Like you look at all these different meanings behind it and the nature behind it. Whereas for me, like I just look at it very simple. And the way that I see with what you just said was that if we don't know the nature of God, that God can be a polygamist or he can be, we have one Heavenly Mother, one Heavenly Father, and there's a battle or a and mix up of what's truth behind that, then that's one of the more simple things that we should probably know, right? And
Yeah.
and then if God wants to be a polygamist whenever he wants to, and then he can command Joseph to be a polygamist, but then he's telling Jacob in the Book of Mormon not to be a polygamist, and that it's an abomination. Like it's almost like your direct core of principles is just changing too much, right?
Yeah, you're
If it's
completely
changing,
destabilized.
if it's changing that much, then okay, then let's talk about the LGBT community. All right, like if so and so can be a polygamist when they want, then all right, then can one man and one man be married in heaven? And and that brings up a whole different topic, but I bring this up because one of the conversations I was having with my friend at this museum, along with his wife, was, I asked her, I said, hey, like, what is it that you would want to see with the church and the LGBTQ community? Like, what do you want to see happen for you to feel more at peace with that whole situation? And her answer was, I want to see those, I want to see a man and a man get married in the temple.
Well, we started off with same-sex temple ceilings. We
Yeah,
did. That's just factual. That's just true.
really,
Yeah,
really.
I mean, Brigham Young and Joseph Smith were sealed. And even I think Brigham Young said there would be the highest ceiling that would one day take place in the temple would be same sex. Now, they weren't sexual, they weren't gay, they weren't romantic.
Mhm.
I call it the Mars to Mercury corridor, and that's even more esoteric that we don't have to get into right now. But um,
And I guess I bring this up because that's an interesting viewpoint that I actually didn't have in that regard, right? But but like what is that? What's that? I guess what I'm trying to say is like what can the man, this is kind of difficult for me to kind of like know where to even direct this to, but with the nature of God, I personally just believe that through the atonement of Christ, and that's really where our focus should be, that Christ can really just help those muddy areas, those gray areas. But that's all I have on that subject. I'll let you take over.
I don't have a ton more to add. So one thing that I think is super important is that that's correct. If you believe that God can command whatever, whenever, it creates a very destabilizing foundation. It quite frankly, it shatters your core. I think that's why, going back to, I think that's why we have so many LGBT issues and so many promiscuity issues and so many masturbation issues and so much porn issues because we have destabilized people to the core with this narrative, in my opinion, because it creates a very chaotic. I mean, in my view, it's satanic insofar that it's inverted from the truth in the fact that it's a lie, in the fact that it's very destabilizing to the core essence of a person's soul to believe. And again, the spiritual blindness, I think, stems from this because it's hyper materialized in the worst impulses of man, a purely materialist doctrine, a shadow of Mars at this point if it goes unaddressed. And it's not a workable model because um it's a misappropriation of the nature of God and how it works. I agree that the LGBT issue is a really big issue, and I think there's even more mysteries around that the more that a lot of things come out. Like there's this running there's this running theory as well that so up until a week ago, I asserted that God was male because I did believe in the Big Bang, and it's why I believe that that's why I believe quote unquote Jesus and Lucifer are brothers because of the splinter of power and force which is a physics concept. And so I always said, well, then I believe that God was a man because believing in the Big Bang, the first impulse electric, then as a byproduct magnetism or the feminine, and then Adam God theory in man uniquely perfected bypass, um, because God was not perfect in the sense that be still and know that I'm God is a still state. The Big Bang or the originating impulse is unstill, but as a derivative of that, immediately became Heavenly Mother, and then humans uniquely perfect in the emanation of both. Now, in the eternal, I don't know even know how this came to me. I was just came to me. I don't so much overthink things as much as they like come to me like visions or like
Like
downloads.
it was it download or like a vision? Like
Yeah, it's
how
not
do you
like it.
normally receive revelation? Like are you sitting on the couch and all of a sudden just well,
Yeah, so it's usually, oh, that's a great question actually. Um, so usually I actually do think it works because usually the moment I start, the reason I tweet so much and I live stream so much is because it's when I get revelation. And it seems to me like it's doing the God's work that prompts the executory mechanism to just unload in this way. And you have to be really good at discerning spirit. I also think you have to discern, you have to understand what Lucifer is so that you understand Christ, because they're both very revelatory, and Christ, as the Book of
oh
Mormon
yeah,
says, it's in the heart.
yeah.
But yeah, it's usually I don't sit around and think about things or study things. They come to me kind of in a chain of flashes. More often than not, once they start on a spiritual string, and then it'll kind of start to hit back to
Hmm.
back to back to back. Um, But it came to me that if you believe in an, and not everyone believes in an eternal God, right? This is a whole argument of like ex nihilo and ex nihilo or whatever. So not everyone even believes in an eternal God. But if you do believe in an eternal God, I realize, well, it has to be a woman. It has to be feminine in essence, right? Not literally a woman, but feminine
Yeah.
in essence, insofar that eternality has to be in somewhat of a vacuum or a void for light to continue to develop within it. So it's feminine from a chicken and the egg standpoint in terms of a womb and like a baby, right? The womb came before the baby, chicken and egg. So
Hmm.
from the first movement standpoint in an eternal model, it has to be a feminine insofar that you believe in gender roles, it has to be feminine insofar that it is magnetic, it is a void, um, or the shadow for the light to be able to exist, it has to be the prequel to the materializing force. So, whereas when I was saying that God was male, and I was saying, well, the God of the Old Testament could be Satan, or at least in Deuteronomy and these different points, now I'm like, well, is the first movement feminine, the masculine, the demiurge or the fallen one? And I always say truth is self-evident. We are denser. Our muscles are denser. Our skin is denser. Like everything, our bones are denser. Everything about us is more dense than the feminine, right? So we are hyper materialized, or we are further materialized than women. We also are only birthed from women. And also, we are fe- every male was first female in the womb and then becomes male later in the pregnancy, right? So even from a self-evident perspective, which is my original model, it still relates back to that. And all this is to say that there's this running theory that I think it's further expanding, that Christ will always be a man. But the reason Christ will always be a man is because Christ might be the feminine expression of a feminine natured God. And so, and if you think about the nature of
Interesting.
Christ, yeah, like love,
A lot of feminine
wisdom,
attributes, yeah.
yeah, love,
Yeah.
wisdom, spirit, like not being married,
Service, service
yeah,
focused,
service
all
to
the
others,
yeah, yeah.
not being married, I think is super important because I always tell, especially the Republican saints, if you believe in America first, then Christ could not have been married because he would then be putting third parties before his immediate family, and that would make him neocon Jesus. So, not married and all these things, then it becomes a lot more probable that Christ is a feminine God's expression of a divine man. Not that Christ will be, because you're like, you're saying that Christ is a woman. No, no, no. I'm saying that Christ has to be a male, but it's the idea of heavenly mother or a feminine essence of a God wearing a masculine avatar. Because
Mhm.
Christ, Jesus took on the Christ was the spirit, Christ was the man. And even my own experience, the more you surrender to divine will, the less of the ego or identity
The
it
natural
dies.
man. The
Yeah, it
natural man
dies, right?
dies. Yeah.
So even right, even in that, right, you have the death of the natural man. So it's almost like the more you think about it, all signs seem all self, what I would call self-evident signs seem to point in this direction. It would be purely Deuteronomy's dogma, so to speak, to accept or at least not consider otherwise.
Well, it's really interesting you say that as well. Well, I mean, and like, I'm not gonna say I'm the most Christ-like person, but a lot of people told me I have a lot of feminine, like, I have a feminine energy, right? And that might be because the way I listen or the way the way I try to be service focused or loving, etc. But then, and so like even within each of us, right? Even within like a male body like this, you can still have like those feminine attributes that are similar to Christ. But then within in the temple, without getting into too much detail, there are covenants where for the men, the blessings of those covenants come through obedience, but for the woman, it's not.
Because they already have the keys to the jurisdiction.
Exactly.
In
100%. Yeah.
um and I think even to your point, right? Like as you bring up an excellent point, the men that have awakened are all on this stream, right? It's and in my view, the ones that are holding on to the kind of 132 orthodoxy narrative are very quickly degenerating. Mentally, I think we can see it. Like everyone's like, bro, like this is not what you
Bro.
thought it was. Like this is not the own that you thought it was. You know, there's you know across, and it's not just one person. It's across the board, right? Everything. It's like and I think in esoteric theology, mysticism, Kabbalah, all those things, there's a moment where if you willfully refuse to grow, you just begin to very quickly degenerate. It's almost like the
Hmm.
breaking of a timeline. So first comes usually in the hierarchy of the way lessons have to be learned from by the soul. Usually first is humiliation, then finance, then health, then death.
Hmm.
And we are, I think we're watching the people that are holding on to that just begin. It's like the Jordan Peterson effects, right? It's like there's a moment, the moment in DNC 84 where you spit in the face of the covenant and then you have no redemption in the world to come. The reason that's the case is because there's a point in malice, or there's a point where where you've seen the truth. It's one thing to pray to be straight. You serendipitously meet the love of your life that happens to be a woman, and you live a happily ever after, versus you marry a man and you're fine or whatever. But then if the first guy, for having met the love of his life, having been perfect, sexual chemistry, the whole thing, and then decides to cheat on some, whatever, we were in the same place, same time. Those two things are very different.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of like my experience. So I've seen this cycle play out. This is the juncture of what would be my fourth time seeing this, or maybe it's a third if I count. Let's say it's a third. But always, what I've seen is there comes a figure that not only has the solutions to what you're looking for and the answers, but also makes it so that telling the truth is even beneficial. And every time that I've seen an immediate collapse after is upon the rejection, not just of the truth, but of the truth that was presented in a way that would have been easy for you to take on, that would have been even contributory to the goals you're trying to accomplish. And the only thing, it's like surgical precision in war. And the only thing you have to overcome is with surgical precision, the one thing that your soul, individually or collectively, has been resistant in overcoming. But at the moment that I've seen that be presented to you, and I think even the nature of the way grades develops and timelines develop relate a lot to this, even in just experiences that I've had within this recapitulation. Um, but what I've seen is that once someone rejects the truth on a silver platter that's beneficial to the ends that you're immediately trying to accomplish, and I've always seen it show itself that way. I've always seen it show itself in a way where it resolves everything, puts you better than stage one, and all you have to do is just
Mhm.
cross a demon you've not wanted to. But every time I've seen people not take it up, and every time I've seen an immediate collapse. It's almost like figures such as these tend to be like the Grim Reaper or they're either your Christ or your Grim Reaper. They are your resurrection or they are your death. Because after
So
this, it's like
wild.
your point of no return.
Yeah.
And so that's in a way the way I'm reading the situation because and this goes back to the parallel of the double speak language of Babylon. Like I think it was in Isaiah, someone was talking about this because now the discourse about us is negatively polarized very fast. But someone was talking about, I think in Isaiah, there's a passage where the reason one of the cities is condemned, I think Babylon, is because it makes a perfect mockery of God, but it adopts the same language. And the nation state of Israel, I think, is a clear example of that. But
Well, I mean, that's actually interesting because from my understanding, the they were speaking the Adamic language before the Tower of Babel. And what's within the Adamic language, that is a language of the gods. And the language drives power in of itself.
it does.
So like when God said, when he's forming the earth, when he said, let there be light and let there be water, let there be, let the land separate from the water, through the Adamic language, within the language itself, but also with his own priesthood creation power, that started to happen, right? And so then as as a people within the Tower of Babylon, we're misusing that language towards, like you said, towards things that were unrighteous within the language of the gods. That's when God said, all right, we're going to now confound the languages. And that's why after that, really no one spoke the Adamic language unless it's given through revelation.
Yeah. I got
Did
chills to the whole time you said that. And
have you
it's
have you heard that before too?
no, I haven't because I actually was not very Christian. I was never a big fan of religion actually. Except until Latter-day Saints. But
But
in
does that resonate with
Yeah,
you?
100%. No, I 100% agree with it. Yeah, 100%. Um, it reminds me of the 72 names of God in Kabbalah, which are somewhat scrambled, right? So basically, each of these names is the name of God, and there's this thing about whoever comes closer to discerning the names becomes more and more and more spiritually ascended until like a Christ-like being. But like for example, um, like if I just were like shuffle it and then like um just take the first card that comes. It's like Nun Lamed Kaf, which using this name summons forth the light to wipe out these plagues at their root. Think about smoking, cancers, AIDS, pollution, nuclear waste, depression, heart disease, hatred, or any other plague that infects the world. Now summon forth the light to wipe out these plagues at their root. And again, the word or the name, this name of God is Nun Lamed Kaf. Right. So, but these seven, so even though these have their own individual power, they're scrambled in such a way where if you can figure out how to properly put them together. And I remember I was actually going through this before I was baptized during my time of Moses, or like when I was, and I'm still very close to Moses, um, in Christ. They're quite a dichotomy, but I remember getting closer and closer and developing more and more and more. Like I could feel it, and not only could I feel it, it was demonstrable that I was developing more and more and more abilities. And maybe it's always stuck with me since. And so I think there's a lot of like, I love Joseph. Seek truth wherever you might find it. I love that we can draw from Jewish mysticism, from Kabbalah, from the Zohar, from the Torah, and also from Islam, the Quran, because that is, but I feel like we've neglected even that. Like, I feel like it should have been incumbent upon us to master. For one, I actually do think you need to understand the Kabbalah to even understand uh, Latter-day Saints. For example, they baptize, or the ordination starts at 8. They say that actually the soul doesn't really effectuate until the age of 8, right? So that's a parallel with us that I'm sure no one has heard before.
Interesting. Interesting.
Um, and so they say that like people that die before that age, their souls, just like us, de facto go to heaven.
Yeah.
Um, they also understand like suffering as like a premortal contract to the overall soul condition of man, to the ends of the fullness of time. Um, they also understand that like there's a certain level of prophetic abilities that don't develop into like the 30. So there's so much
And
that
what's amazing about that, and my understanding about all this, is the fact that it's not, once again, it's not the church that is true. It is, the gospel is an energy. The gospel is a knowledge. And that gospel, those teachings have been trickled down through so many different societies through people like you that were able to receive revelation, that were able to receive downloads. And that did not always come through the designated prophet of that time on the earth, right? I don't know the timelines of the Kabbalah versus a Torah versus a Quran versus a Bible, but every civilization has a right to be able to have, to have a spokesperson to God, including themselves, right?
yeah, I think Kabbalah, I could be wrong, but I do think it's Book of Mormon situated because I think it predates the Zohar came after, but I think a lot of elements came prior. I think it's similarly situated actually to the way the Book of Mormon is construed. Um, and I agree with you. Like I
Those are all,
think
they're just all eternal truths, like, and they're truths not only within our eternity, they're or within our world, they're truths within the gospel of the universe, right?
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's definitely I even think the nature of prophecy is like the only thing that in a lot of ways, the only thing I'm doing is like I'm reading the cosmology or like the heartbeat of the where God is going. By that I mean the frontmost moving force. And I can parallel where that is moving, and I can read what the actions amongst a people, collective or individuals, are moving in parity to that. And I can, by reading the velocity of the timeline, I can usually um, discern what consequences will lead to what on in around what time, because I'm really only transcribing um, the expression that will inevitably result based on XYZ moving actions. Um, It reminds me of the missing plates, because the missing plates story to me is a whole mystery unto itself, because the missing plates, the woman I construed to be Sophia, um, which is the Sophia is the wisdom of the feminine that is hidden in esoterica. And because why was it a woman that took the plates, right? And the woman was seeking confirmation in the knowledge.
mhm.
And then now she is also the holder of the missing tablets. And I construe the missing tablets to be the Akashic records, which is basically what a lot of people through all of time, and I think this was Joseph Smith as well, going to his original testimony, I don't read in its original testimony him alleging physical plates. Without getting into that, there is what is called the Akashic records, and everyone, oh, I gotta send you this video, but a lot of people have talked about this where once they deconstruct their fears, insecurities, traumas, or what have you, all you're left with is sort of, quote unquote, the face of God. But they all say, and including my, like, for me, it was the Zohar, which is only Hebrew, that was glowing in the appearance of gold. But everyone that has a testament of the Akashic records is the mysteries of God. They're always tablets, and they're always either glowing the emanation of gold or an emerald, which
Hmm.
is also the heart. And then you have Emerald City, the whole mysteries within that. But I think the missing plates are the Akashic records under the jurisdiction of Sophia, or the feminine esoteric wisdom, and everyone is like a wild chicken looking for missing plates when we don't even have the original plates that would have had to have been transfigured. So then the allegation that we're making is that physical metal plates were transfigured back to an angel. Like that's what we are alleging when we are
Yeah.
saying that the plates are physical,
Yeah.
which I'm not going to die on that hill. But then all of these hills begin to construe, in my opinion, what Joseph Smith calls the disabusement that has to happen in the saints that I think we started this year with, where I think the first, like I think 1.1 is like Joseph Smith's prequel about the disabusement upon the saints as to the narrative of everything. And I think, hate to bring it back to 132, but I think in the hyper materializing from the distorted masculine perspective into the polygamy
Yeah.
made it so that everything had to be hyper materialized, because if it wasn't hyper materialized, then 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 the goals that the polygamists were trying to accomplish would no longer work, right? It's why every society had to, it's why every society in the Jewish epoch, or in this materialist, outside in externalities epoch, has consistently done is remove the feminine, right? It was from the Bible, from the
Hmm.
everyone's done it because it's the only way to keep the
The
shadow of
nat
Mars.
the natural man.
Correct. And the natural man and the natural Mars, the building the Temple of Moloch, building the central control New World Order that is the Messiah of they them.
Yeah.
Um, and the only way that could work, it's like kind of my original assertion, right? The creeds are Christian because Jews told them they were Christian. Like not,
Interesting.
it's like they're Christian within their universe. And you
Yeah.
get to argue amongst you guys as Pharisees about nuance, but never about the mysteries of God or the keys to them. Right.
Hmm.
And that's where I'm at with everything today. And so yeah, I do think it's a junction of the road. Going to the LGBT mysteries, I do actually think, because why is the first the last and the last the first? Why is it that he says the way you've treated me is how you've treated the least of thee, the least of, you know, how you treat the least of these, how you treat, like it begins to put a lot of things together. Why was it a transgressor from the womb in Isaiah? Like it really begins to cook your noodle, even mine, a little bit. Now, just to be clear, any ascended figure would have transcended all sexual impulse, but it does radically change the lens by we've about everything, I think, in that regard.
And so, where would you like to see that, or where do you think that's like what the end? The first will be last, and last will be first. What do you mean by that? Towards that doctrine, towards that community, towards
Well, I think every
the
LGBT person I've
potential there.
met is
Hmm.
do what every LGBT identifying person that I've met is much more spiritually inclined than their heteronormative counter. I've never seen it be otherwise ever, right? So if we're going by fruits, I think on its face, that's a really big marker. Um, in the same respect, being that everything's been inverted deliberately, I do feel that the sexual rainbow in the gay community is an inversion of the light body rainbow. Now, as far as if I could wave a magic wand, I think what I would do is definitely allow for LGBT baptisms. I would allow for same-sex unions to be baptized. I that's really my big quandary is the barrier to entry in any regard to Christ is I have a general issue with. Because even if you're right about all the allegations, you're playing God and being the arbiter of that. Um, so I would permit for that. I would love for the stigma to go away, but I don't imagine that happening. The reason I would like ceilings, generally speaking, to return to what Joseph Smith intended, which is not in the universe of marriage anything at all. Um, which then moots the conversation in that regard. Um, the big reason I don't think we should have hardline commandments isn't because I don't believe in their principles, but it's because I think the nature of humanity, because we are children of God, are hardwired for love and liberty. And so I think I I was naturally word of wisdom compliant before baptism, and it's been a lot harder after baptism, even in impulse or even in thought, only because the idea of a force from the outside in telling me that I cannot do something, I inherently reject on a soul level. So I think it's ineffective to the ends that it's trying to accomplish. And I think that's why it was not by commandment. So if I were Master of the Universe Prophet, I would counsel same-sex wedded couples or relationships about what is love, what is a trauma bond, what is attachment, what is addiction, what is lust, and do we believe that they all cross over? And if so, where do they cross over? And just let them teach them proper principles and let them govern themselves. That
Hmm.
would be
And
my
do you think in the afterlife that those tendencies that they are who they are for the eternities in that regard?
I think they're powerful enough to make it so. Do I think that two masculine, well, one, to your point, so the humankind, mankind is masculine because it's temporal versus the spiritual counterpart. So humanity's already masculine. The masculine humanity expression already has male and female within, or masculine and feminine within them. My thing is, absolutely, absolutely, you have to properly heal and fill the fatherhood wound if you're a boy. And I don't think there's exaltation bypassing that. Meaning that if you're an LGBT identifying person in their 18s, 20s, that has to be cured before the next stage. What I mean by cured, it could be a same-sex relationship while you guys hammer out your energetic dynamics in that. Um, my position is that they're properly hammered out, that they would actually likely face out of it in a church, meaning that if they stay in the church, if we allow them to be together, I actually think it would be hammered out and healed before their mid-20s because it would realize, oh, like we filled the void that was missing from the love and the nature and containment, and so we can keep it moving now.
Yeah, we can move
Like
on, we can progress on. But if
it's
they don't, yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, it's almost like sometimes I think people just need a really good, honest, like
Like it filled
huddle.
their cup. They filled their cup,
Yeah, like I
right?
feel like they need to be held, right?
Yeah.
I think that needs to happen. I think they would evolve past that though. And that's why I would want to keep them in the church, is because I actually do have faith that it will be something they evolve past because I really do believe that that's actually the core underlying thing. And I think if you get married in the temple and you do all the other things, but you don't feel that, I don't think you can even come to exaltation because that is a really integral part that's missing in
Hmm.
your exaltation recipe, so to speak.
Hmm.
So in the hierarchy of needs, I would rather them. LGBT comes from me and they're 17, first, I would rather you be in the church and monogamous. And if you're going to be with a boy, I would rather you marry first and never go to West Hollywood or San Francisco or Montrose or anything like that. I would rather you
Yeah.
stay here, hammer it out here, marry within here, and outside of your same-sex attraction and maybe wedding and sealing or whatever, keep your covenants, don't drink, don't. I would actually be much more strict if I allow, I would be infinitely more strict on same-sex couples, on everything else, if I was going to permit them. Don't drink, don't smoke. Even though I believe not by commandment, but I would be very like, this is why you're gonna open, you're gonna really mess something up that will fundamentally make this something else, as is with all things. Anything that becomes slightly inverted from the rest of it can be disastrous. Um, that would be my uh first prescription. I would predict that if I allow that, they would and like Christ said, like a fasting cleanse, get some uh what is it? Get some parasite cleansers. As you're doing all this, as instructed, I'm not a doctor, can't make medical recommendations. Drink this twice the amount of time, twice the dose. Come back 3 weeks from now. Let me know how you feel. Um, do what you're gonna do otherwise, right? Let you govern yourself. Come back to me in 3 weeks. Um, I would expect that formula would probably be would cause people to phase out. And if they don't, I'm fine with it. But I suspect a good amount of them would phase out. Letting them just be. Just don't leave. Hold on to there and run otherwise. Just but whatever.
So
Um,
not, and I'm not going to ask you to speak for everybody, obviously, but with that context, you're saying that there's a certain percentage that might have that traction because of some sort of trauma, some sort of um energy,
I,
like
I feel like
energy void.
I feel like boys really need to be held. I feel like they need to. I think boys really need their fathers to be able to hold emotional space for them, not just hang out with them and play basketball and video games and watch the game. No, like actually hold
Hold
them
them.
and
Yeah.
actually, because if even for exaltation, you have to develop the emotional and spiritual constitution to be able to contain another party's emotions. Like just from the onset, you have to do
Yeah.
that to contain
Yeah.
another human being's emotions, right? So if that's being circuit broken, the whole chain breaks, right? And I think that's why, if that was cited correctly, I think that's why Brigham Young even said that the same-sex male ceilings would be the highest ceilings because of this. It plays a very paradoxical role to the Pulitzer jurisdiction that we opened this video with in terms of the feminine. But now, if they stay there, they're like, no, we're a perfect energetic match. We love each other. We did the dewarmers, we did the whole thing. We still love each other. We want to come home to each other. Like this is it. We love it. Yeah, I could believe. Yeah, yeah, because I think exaltation. I think you to graduate this plane, I think you have to individuate your spiritual eye, meaning that your free and divine will and ether have to merge, but under the hope of ether, meaning that your the way that God uniquely prompts you, the way he commends you to obey, for me, on everything from run for office and just bizarre things that are not like these blanket prescriptions. You're going to be very unique. But I think when those merge with your talents and your free will and your divine will and all those things, and then you have your election made sure, you have enough of a spiritual substrate or spiritual substance to hold a light body. And I think the way I read exaltation is the evolution of the souls merge, and the more you're able to contain love, wisdom, um, holding space, fortitude, containment, be able to listen, as you said, the more and more and more you amalgamate to be able to hold more and more and more matter until you quote unquote have your own planet. So, do I think that two same-sex essences can evolve in spiritual containment to effectuate a Mars
And
or a
progress.
Venus? Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I
and
absolutely think it
the way
could.
you're saying that, they can progress, right? Like that's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's really interesting. I've never even really thought about it. I've never had a conversation like this about this, so it's it's interesting to me that right now they're constrained and they're limited and restricted on quote unquote covenants that could be made.
It's a very old
Um,
epoch. I mean, and when we graduate, like once we have a certain, I think, window or runway to phase out of models, but if we don't phase out of models properly, they do become inverted.
yeah. Why why is maybe not a lot of this type of stuff brought up in something like the Book of Mormon and circumstances there or the Bible? Much of same-sex attraction.
Because it's a non-issue. If you think about all the sins that relate to breach of consent, murder, theft, breach of consent,
Yeah.
cheating on your spouse, implied fraud, and implied breach of consent, right?
Yeah.
So two consenting adults are there's I don't think anybody imagined that this would become such a thing. Like I don't
Interesting.
and I actually and also you have to remember that both, well, I don't want to say both, but definitely the Bible was significantly edited and a lot of books were thrown out. The Secret Gospel of John is
True.
fascinating. Um, there's a lot of things that have just been thrown out. I think as I think about it more, I think a lot of I think because the world inverts upon people and like as a primary motive by the powers that be, I think a lot of the resulting LGBT individuals are actually um more attuned to the Christ essence in a way as a default setting. And so I think
Yeah,
the
I
easiest way
agree.
to poison pill, yeah. And so I
I
think the
agree.
easiest yeah, and I think the easiest way to poison pill is with sex because of the way it affects your dopamine levels and what have you. Now, I think because we're children of God, we're naturally self-correcting or course correcting. So I think, that didn't stick in the way they thought it was going to. But but I think that was a deliberate because the diametric opposition to the crown and the third eye would be the sacral and the root. So I think it just makes sense. That would have been the mechanism to destabilize a Christ stream or the Melchizedek stream. I think that would have been the most genius way for the Pharisaic paradigm to invert that. So can you hear my cats meowing, by the way, through the audio?
No,
Okay, good.
no.
Because then they're
Yeah.
gonna ruin it. Okay, good. So I think cats are for Venus and dogs are for Mars, but I digress. I think um yeah, I think the LGBT ostracizing is a huge portion of a condemnation, not just here, but in the world. Because I do think if you think about the fullness
The
of time,
and you understand what I'm saying is the energy, the Christ-like energy, the energy they bring to the world is 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 horrific, is is quote unquote diminished in our eyes because of their attraction to the same sex, right?
right? And in that way, I do think the first should be the last, and the last should be the first. And so far, that spirit runs first as the first movement. So there would be the feminine, and I don't want to say LGBT by de facto, but the predispositive stream or soul essence that may eventually, by manipulation or otherwise, relate that way would be a first movement. Certainly before I think the densest of them all, which is the natural man uh, in a sleeping stage. Um,
Hmm.
I think also when this was happening in any biblical reference, you have to remember that it is not just LGBT people that have same-sex relations. A lot of people do it as satanic rituals as well, who don't identify as gay or bi.
Yeah.
I think Aleister Crowley is a good example of that, that they were trying to deliberately, and I don't even know that this works, but something they were trying to do is deliberately trying to summon from the lower astral by such rituals. And so I think a lot of people that were practicing satanic rituals were using that as a vehicle. And I think those are very different and distinct than your neighbor that thinks he likes this other neighbor or whatever, you know?
Mhm. That's so fascinating. That's so fascinating. I
Many
would,
mansions.
oh yeah, right. And and if, from my perspective, of course, I want them to feel loved and to exude that love to others in the same way that Christ would, right? And and that's how they should be judged, and not via these other things that are going on. But
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I want to say on that is that we don't even know that same-sex, quote unquote, married people are even doing anything sexual. Like I think this is bizarre stereotype, and I only see it from Latter-day Saints where they like immediately and again, this is why I think spiritual blindness is so serious at our church because I've only ever seen Latter-day Saints be like, yeah, like make comments that would make you believe that they only marry for sex, like these specific individuals, and you're like, what? Like that's not. It's just even like the way they paint like you know they're just marrying impulse. It's like no, and I hope you're not just marrying impulse either, because if you are just
mhm,
marrying impulse, that's gonna lead to killing your wife and all these other things that we're seeing happen now. But I think a lot of people just feel more comfortable coming home to the same sex, even if they are celibate and always having been celibate, having been married. Like
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
even know that that association is even accurate, which
yeah.
I think the entire projection is just bizarre that people throw at the community.
Well, it's lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of maybe, like, for example, the trauma, like you're saying, or the trauma bond, or yeah, I mean, just lots of different angles that we don't really have the right to judge based off of the knowledge that we have, the limited knowledge that we have, right? But
Yeah.
um, yeah, we kind of obviously been all over the place today,
No, but
which
it's
I
good.
which
I
I
think it made
love.
sense.
I guess it flows.
Yeah, no, I like this a lot. Do you have any like concluding thoughts, I guess?
I guess from my end, at least, until we reconnect in the next week or so, I mean, my concluding thoughts are hold on, like, and like what I continue to try to do is just hold on more to what's going to bring me closer to Christ than what is going to bring me closer to the church.
Those are two different
And
things, so you have to remember that.
and that's they are completely different things, right? And that's what I'm trying to say, right? Like, as we as we have that perspective of what's going to bring me closer to Christ, that should take a lot more precedence over what's going to bring me closer to the church. And such perspectives like the LGBT and the love towards them, the understanding, the compassion towards them, or towards the prophets. Prophets are going to speak, and sometimes they're speaking from the voice of God, and other times they're not speaking. They're speaking towards the voice of man, with their own limited knowledge. So, in closing, that's kind of where that's what keeps me in. That's what keeps me grounded in the church, is realizing that the gospel of Jesus Christ is true, but the church is still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I will close there.
No, I agree. Yeah, I guess I I love that. I think something I will say is like I always tell people, um, do whatever you want, just don't gaslight yourself, right? And I think you can grow closer to the church and also closer to Christ, and you can do them independently as long as you're mindful as to which one's which, right? That the number one thing that I try to get people to do is like I don't even want to deconstruct anything, just untie things that maybe shouldn't be tied together, right? So I think you can independently get closer to the church. Like I'm trying to think, okay, like how is it going to happen for me as we navigate these times? And it could just be that just holding space or being there or love and wisdom, or whatever it may be, and then be very mindful like this is me getting closer to the church and this other thing is me getting closer to Christ. And I hope that I soon see the day where they merge. But I think as long as we don't lie to ourselves, I think we can do all things, in a lot of ways, quite literally. um so I guess my closing thoughts is I'm so glad we met. I am so glad we're doing this. I think um I hope that people find this. I think our purview is distinct enough that we lay a foundation that we can build on mutual ground over what we agree and have in common versus what we have different. And maybe that's my prayer, to focus more as a people on the things we have in common over what we have different, and that we maybe pray for the clarity of all people. And I'm super grateful for you. And I think anybody that has taken any time at all to listen to any of us. And I am super grateful to have you. um,
Thank you. It's been my
yeah,
pleasure, and it's been awesome, obviously, hearing your perspective on things as well. And I guess I should have done my closing with you involved, but I figured I figured from my end, I look forward to the relationship that we build through this, and the more knowledge that I am able to gain from this, even the spiritual, even the feelings of the spirit I feel now is is very is very real with as I sit here.
yeah, I agree. I love that. And actually, I hopefully if we can bring more of that to the world, then people will find their own discernment in all things.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, well, I guess we'll close with that, and then hopefully we'll see each other and everyone else next week. And hopefully maybe we might have a joint branded channel and all that. So I guess
there we
we'll
go.
circle on that, and then yeah, I guess I will stop the recording.